So if anyone has any questions, happy to try and answer them at least.
Good morning. Thank you so much. That was awesome. You talked a little bit earlier about restrictions. What does that really mean?
What do you mean restrictions?
When you were talking about some of the benefits that different people have done, different steps, and you said that some of them have restricted antibiotics.
Oh, okay.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I know it sounds good in the headlines, right? But you have to look at it. A lot of them are they're restricting. I mean, it depends on which company we're talking about, but some of them are just restricting. Basically, if I'm remembering correctly, I think Walmart and McDonald's are restricting human antibiotics that are used in human health, and they're restricting them not completely from farms, but just for growth promotion purposes. For a long time, the factory farmers have used, the agriculture industry, have used antibiotics because they actually make the animals get fatter quickly and put on more weight, which has some troubling implications for antibiotic residue in our food. If we're consuming this antibiotic residue and it's having an effect and changing it, the way it works is probably by changing our gut bacteria, the types of bacteria in our gut, in a way that could be promoting obesity in us. That hasn't been proven by science yet, but it's a very real possibility, and it's something that people are looking at. Anyway, so this is something that's been used in animal agriculture to make the animals to change their gut bacteria so they put on more weight quickly and are more prone to gaining muscle and fat. So the companies are saying, okay, we're not going to use it for growth promotion, but they're still going to use it for. The other reason that farmers are using antibiotics is because of overcrowded condition. I mean, you cram a bunch of animals into a barn, you're going to get disease, right? It's a breeding ground for disease. And they're still going to use the antibiotics for those preventative measures, which is just the real problem is the overcrowding. If you didn't have that overcrowding and you had better animal welfare, you wouldn't need those antibiotics for prevention purposes. So there's still going to be antibiotics used, for Walmart and Tyson as well. It's going to be less, but they're still going to be used. So the problem hasn't really been solved.
Thank you. Okay, can you address a little bit about germinated and dehydrated foods and the benefits of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly will tell you, I don't know that much about germinated foods. So it's not a subject that I can speak too much on. I know that there's a lot of benefit to raw foods because I don't believe in a fully raw diet, but I think that there's a lot of enzymes that raw foods have that are really beneficial for our bodies and also help us digest food a lot better, and may also have an impact on our gut bacteria. But I honestly don't know that much about germination. So.
Okay, so I'd like to share that Ann Wigmore was my personal mentor back in '85, and one of the things that we do is germinate, and I'm entering into Casa de Amparo, which is a refuge place for children 18 to 25 years. And if anybody has had not any experience with it, I have some germinated and dehydrated pumpkin seeds. And we're actually teaching our clients to take germinated seeds to the schools. And we have 7 schools right now that the kids are just eating them. Kids are bringing them in, they're sprouting them, they're germinating them, taking them in, and trying them out. So if anybody would like to find out and join our initiative, Our Children, Our Future, talk to me before we go to lunch. Thank you.
Thanks.
Why do we have to soak nuts?
Do we have to soak nuts?
I don't want to. I just want to eat them. If I buy nuts that are raw and healthy, why are they telling us that we got to soak them in water?
Right.
And I've done it. It doesn't taste as good.
Yeah, right, something with phytic acid. I don't go to that level, right? So I don't. Nuts are an incredibly healthy snack, incredibly healthy to add to food. So they have lots of great fats in them, fiber. So I don't soak my nuts. So I think if you want to, it probably does make them a little bit healthier, especially if you're concerned about phytic acid. But you certainly don't need to. From my opinion.
In 1909, Procter & Gamble got the patent for hydrogenation and for partially hydrogenating. So that was in keeping with the 1910, 1912 of the Crisco coming out. And I also wanted to say, when they do laboratory tests to make lab rats fat, they use monosodium glutamate. And the website truthandlabeling.org, I don't know if you've checked it out, it starts to list the different things that are actually hidden in the foods as food additives for MSG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, some people are concerned about glutamate or glutamic acid in their food. It's I'm aware of those studies where they use MSG to make lab animals fat for purposes of the study. It's just one more example of how the food industry is constantly taking food apart and manipulating it. So to create MSG or any of these other MSG-like additives, like hydrolyzed vegetable protein or autolyzed yeast, or there's a whole long list of them. They're ripping apart, often chemically, ripping apart protein molecules to get the glutamic acid, which is a component of it's one of the amino acids in protein. So it's just the model of when you start taking food apart and having something that's normally bound molecularly to other things, like when you eat food, there's glutamic acid in all kinds of food that we eat, but it's bound up into these molecules. You start separating it out and getting free glutamic acid, it functions very differently in our bodies. You start tinkering around, and sometimes you create a giant mess, as we've seen with trans fat.
Hi, I apologize because I was a little bit late. You may have covered this, but I was really curious about your stand on GMOs and organic, especially in all of the fast food. I mean, Chipotle just went all non-GMO, but other than that, I mean, fast food and packaged food is just saturated with that, and there's a huge labeling issue and all that. So what do you think about that?
I was trying to avoid GMOs because it's so controversial, but it's a good. It's definitely worth talking about. My feeling on GMOs is that they should absolutely be labeled. We should know what's in our food. The fact that the food industry is fighting it is ridiculous. There's a zillion things on the label that we know about is in our food. This would just be one more thing. It's not going to be a skull and crossbones, except if, for the people that really care about it. Most people will just ignore the labels, but it should be labeled. I think there's an open question about the health implications of GMOs. If you really look at the science, and I think you have to, they certainly haven't been proven safe. But I haven't seen a ton of evidence that shows that there's a human health aspect. But there are other reasons to avoid GMOs because of the way, not necessarily because of the technology itself, but because of the way it's been used. I mean, it's basically been used to feed the factory farming monocropping system of agriculture, which is kind of a fight against nature. It's not working in any way trying to work with nature, which is what organic production does. It's trying to beat it down, which nature's always going to win. We're just not going to be able to outsmart nature, not anytime soon in our evolution anyway. So, like with Roundup, these crops that are genetically modified to tolerate Roundup, we've seen super weeds developing because of that, and the weeds have outsmarted Monsanto and found a way to become resistant. So you have these fields where they're not killing the weeds as glyphosate or Roundup is not killing the weeds like they're supposed to. So what is the response of Monsanto and DuPont and the other chemical companies? Well, it's to just escalate the chemical arms race and to find new chemicals that they can spray on fields that will kill these weeds. And it doesn't take very much logic to figure out that maybe in another 10, 20, 30 years, that those weeds will become resistant to the new chemicals that are being sprayed on them. So I think the way genetically modified technology has been applied is the real problem. I mean, there's some, you could look at drought-tolerant maize and things like that actually isn't a viable technology yet. Monsanto just talks about it. That there could be some beneficial aspects to that. I don't know. I mean, I think it has to be evaluated. But the way it's been applied has been. It really only benefits Monsanto. You could argue it benefits the farmers a little bit because it makes farming a little bit easier, but it doesn't make it easier if then you're dealing with super weeds down the road. So it's certainly not benefiting consumers in the least. It's just benefiting mostly the biotech companies.
I was curious about your research. Did you come up against any roadblocks and had to maybe go in a different direction? Is this stuff easily available? I just bought your book, so I haven't read it yet.
Yeah.
I was just glancing through some of the footnotes and so on. But I'm curious about, how do you go about getting all this stuff, and were there any problems?
Well, yeah, I mean, the food industry is very careful about what they say. So that's why I ended up talking to a lot of the ingredient companies, because they're not in the public eye. They're not these like big publicly traded companies that everyone knows. So they were a lot more willing to talk to me and tell me about how food is made and about their processes. The food manufacturers, the big companies, the fast food companies, and the food like Kellogg's and McDonald's and General Mills and Pepsi, to some extent, they would talk to me. Some of them wouldn't at all. Like General Mills and Kellogg were horrible. They did not want to talk at all. They're a lot more. They have very elaborate press departments, and they're very careful about what they say. And like I mentioned, none of them would let me inside any of their cereal plants to talk about how their cereal is made, how their product is made. And they say it's for proprietary reasons. But I'm not going to go and like take pictures and send it to their competitor. I mean, that's a So yeah, there were a lot of, difficulties and there definitely is a lot of secrecy in the food industry. Yeah, but you find ways around it. Yeah. I mean, I'd been thinking about it for a long time and collecting notes and talking to people, but in terms of actually intensely working on it, it was maybe about 1.5 years, 2 years. Yeah.
I originally was going to ask almost exactly what you did, because I'm a fellow journalist in food issues as well, and I know there's a lot of roadblocks trying to get the information, and people don't want to talk to you, or you get the exact same PR statement back that doesn't answer your question. So I was wondering if you had maybe a funny story or a situation that was quite difficult in your writings.
Well, one of the things I really wanted to do was to go to one of the earliest conversations I had that really spiked my interest was I was talking to an oil chemist, and he was telling me about how vegetable oil is made. Because if you actually look, vegetable oil is one of the biggest. It's actually contributing somewhere between 5 and 10% of our total calories coming from vegetable oil, and the biggest part of that is soybean oil. And so he was telling me about how vegetable oil is made, and he said, well, these factories have to be explosion proof. And I thought, aren't we making food? Like, why is it explosion proof? And he said, well, that's because of the hexane. And it turns out that the way you get the oil out of soybeans and corn and canola is by drenching it in hexane. And hexane, if anyone knows, is it's a product, it's a direct product of the petroleum refining process. So basically the same process that gives you gasoline gives you hexane and a bunch of other things. And it's a neurotoxic chemical, and it's very flammable. So that was why these factories have to be explosion proof. And I just thought, I was amazed by that, and I thought, oh my God, like what else is going on in the food industry that I don't know? I mean, and it's interesting because if you go into the supermarket, you actually will see on bottles of vegetable oil, which is predominantly soybean oil, it'll say 100% natural. And if people had any idea how these things were made, I mean, 100% natural is a far cry from the truth of how these things are made. There's nothing 100% natural about it. In addition to the fact that it's also coming from GMO seeds, which are not, those should not be called natural either. So, so anyway, I really wanted to go to see some of these plants. There's about, it's a very consolidated industry. There's about 3 companies that do it. So I talked to all of them. One of them shut me down right away. And then the others seemed to think, that, oh, that's great. You can come see the process. And I was going back and forth with the PR person, trying to set up a time for me to go visit. I think it was in Illinois, which is where the whole soybean industry started, Decatur, Illinois. And then he just stopped responding. He just kind of disappeared and wouldn't return my phone calls and wouldn't return my emails. So as a result, I never got into to see those production facilities either, which is was very, very disappointing. But I can understand why they wouldn't want to let a journalist in there. It's not going to look good for them. So it doesn't look good for them anyway. But yeah, no, I have to tell them. Yeah. I mean, sometimes when I call 800 numbers to find out stuff, I'll just call as a regular person and see if they'll tell me. Like, one of the things that is particularly vexing is a lot of the chain restaurants that are not the fast food restaurants, like Applebee's and Cheesecake Factory, they don't list their ingredients. And I'm fairly sure that it's just an additive-laden amalgamation of reheated products at those restaurants, but they won't publish their ingredients. So sometimes I'll call up and try and see if I can get them to tell me something, and then I won't say that I'm a journalist. But certainly, yeah, for anything like that where I'm dealing with these big companies directly in their PR, yeah, you have to, yeah.
So if you buy olive oil organic at Costco or Sam's Club, and they're charging you a bit more than regular olive oil, are you really getting olive oil, or are you getting oil with hexane, or how do we know what we're getting?
Right,
It's
so if it's cold,
cold-pressed.
olive oil is not, there's no hexane with olive oil, no. So the reason that you need hexane is because, I mean, if you think about a soybean or a canola bean, I mean, these are like hard, dense things. Like if you were in your kitchen trying to make soybean oil, like you'd be there all day, like you'd get like a drop, you get like a little secretion of it. It's very difficult to get the oil out of these things. They're not naturally designed to produce oil. But so you need something really heavy and industrial to get it out. I mean, hexane gets almost all the oil out, like 99% of it. There's another technology, if you look on labels, some of the natural foods that use vegetable oils, they say expeller pressed. And that's where they're not using hexane, they're using a mechanical process, like big giant machines where they're crushing it. And that gets out about 70% of the oil. So cold pressed, which you can do for olives, you could do that in your kitchen. You could take a bunch of olives and get a press. And so they're basically just pressing it mechanically without any heat. Yeah. Or chemicals, correct, yeah. Because olives naturally lend themselves to oil. I mean, they're very easy, it's easy to get the oil out, yeah. So you would never need to use chemicals for that, nor would you want to.
Hi again. I feel sick. Over the years,
Sorry about
between the chickens and the things we shouldn't eat, now I've gone 8 days without any animal products and sugar, and I do feel much better.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, so now I just looked up Monsanto, and I didn't know, but they're with Scots, and they're in agreement. And now we're not supposed to use Miracle Grow, which I always thought was the next best thing to apple pie. So now it says, under the agreement, Scots will pay Monsanto a one-time upfront payment of $300 million in exchange for a Roundup brand license, extended agency agreement, and technology agreement. And they say they look forward to continued partnership with Scots as they work to deliver consumers with a diverse range of lawn and garden solutions.
Right.
So I think I'm going to go home, and I live in a zero lot line house. I'm going to get rid of my lawn, but I haven't figured out what I'm going to do. My neighbors are probably going to all be really upset, but I'm going to do that.
You should check, it depends on where you live, but sometimes there are lawn services that will come and do organic weed treatment. They'll come and treat your lawn for you. Sometimes you can buy it. It's a little hard to find in stores, though. I found certainly Home Depot doesn't carry it. But I would check to see if there's any sort of natural lawn solutions in your area.
Thank you for this talk. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. All right, well, thank you so much. It's been really a pleasure to be here, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.